The Dust Bowl migrants. What brought them to Tulare County? Some believe they were driven out of their homelands by Mother Nature. Huge dust storms that destroyed crops and made daily living nearly impossible. But history reveals several factors that contributed to the Dust Bowl disaster. Before farmers planted vast acres of wheat crops in the Southern Plains area, native grasses maintained a 12-inch topsoil which had been drought-resistant for thousands of years. Dry farming was successful and profitable in the early decades of the 1900s, but in 1931, an 8-year drought cycle and planting methods which had stripped the topsoil combined with other factors to create the disaster that would cost many their livelihood and sometimes even their lives.
My great-great-grandfather was a marshal who worked in the Oklahoma Territory, and he went out there on behalf of Judge Parker out of Fort Smith, Arkansas, who was known as the hanging judge, and he would bring people back for justice or judgment. I don't know if there's some kind of a connection between what I ended up here and that long ago ancestor of mine. But my folks generally were from Arkansas. I visited those areas. Dirt roads, they were dirt farmers. My dad worked on the farms around in Arkansas. My grandfather had some property, and he had to leave it because of the products that they were producing in the 30s couldn't be sold. There was no money. And so he took his family, as well as my mom, and she had 2 children at that time, and they headed west.
Many years after she passed away, we actually found a handwritten account of her recollections of leaving Oklahoma and what had happened to her father. When his father passed away, his mother remarried after about a year, and the stepfather was not very nice to the boys. And when my grandfather was 12, he actually kicked the 3 boys out of the house. And so at 12 years old is the highest education my grandfather had, started working in the fields in Oklahoma. Times got really tough in Oklahoma. My mother Lou was the oldest, and when they were about 8 years old, their father left Oklahoma for California. This was in about 1936.
My parents migrated here during the 1930s and 1940s. They were in fact Dust Bowl Okies. And my mom often talked about the good life and what it was like to be raised on a farm in Oklahoma. Later, it was taken from her family, and my dad was a similar situation. That's what they were looking for, was that good life again, which they never found.
The economic depression of 1929 had set the stage for tough times. Farmers all over the country were suffering. Wheat prices had dropped dramatically. Thousands of workers had become unemployed when farm owners switched to the efficiency of tractor farming. Sharecroppers could not compete with these new methods. There was no natural or economic shield left for protection when the dust storms of 1931 began.
It was a very difficult time. My mother remembers the dust storms and how everything was always dirty in the house. She said they were never able to really clean the house, and as they would come into the house after working, they would have to work in the house and get all of the dust and the dirt out of the house. And she remembers the doors not sealing well, the windows not sealing well, and not really being able to really keep the dirt and the dust out of the house. And so they would wet towels and put towels underneath the doors to try to keep the dust from coming in and blowing in the doors. She remembers working hard there and not really seeing a crop, and she remembers just not ever seeing anything grow there.
Generations to come would feel the blast of these devastating storms.
My oldest brother I never knew because he also died in Arkansas. As it was told to me, he was sick and could not, there was no medical care available for anybody unless you went into the city and they literally did not have the dollar it would take to buy gas. You would have to pay for somebody to take you in, and he died.
Families losing babies that that would die because of the dust, and so many people were ill, and how they got sick because of the airborne dust getting into their lungs, and sometimes it would just smother them to death.
With their land barren and homes seized in foreclosure, many farm families were forced to leave.
Made me realize this is why they left, because there really was no hope there. There was nothing there for them.
In 1935, the worst dust storm of this period caused extensive damage and left thick layers of dust as far away as New York and Washington, D.C. Experts stated that 850 million tons of topsoil had blown off the southern plains that year alone.
Some of the towns are still just blown away, and there's buildings without roofs on them that were just left as the building owner or whoever lived there just walked away. And as they walked away, they left the brick buildings with no roofs just in place, and they're still there to this day.
Out of desperation, many responded to the exaggerated claims of work opportunities in the West.
Loaded up what they considered to be valuables, which were old pictures and birth certificates and things like that, and in a carpet bag, and they had the clothes on their back, and they were picked up one morning by a converted cattle truck, and it was still enclosed as if it were hauling cows, except there were benches lining the inside of the truck, and she said it was standing room only, and they took off.
And they headed west, literally in a car that didn't have room for my dad. And so my dad bummed his way west, literally staying with families, working and picking cotton and different things, making his way to the west.
Going down the road feeling bad. I'm going down the road feeling bad. I'm going down the road feeling bad. Lord, Lord, and ain't gonna be treated this way.
Many growers took advantage of the cheap workforce as it migrated across Arizona and New Mexico on the way to the promised land of California.
They came out with two other families in one car. She remembered it being a really large Oldsmobile type vehicle, and they piled it high to the sky, and she remembers sleeping underneath billboard signs on the freeway as they came out.
And after a few days on the road, they came to Eloy, Arizona, where they were going to stop and pick cotton and make enough money to continue their trip. They thought they were going to make about $3 a 100 pounds. That means if you pick 100 pounds of cotton, you get $3 for it. A healthy adult could easily pick 250 pounds of cotton a day. There were 8 of them. Some of them were children. The children could maybe pick 100 pounds a day. And they had it figured where they were going to make $150 a day, and after a week they were going to have enough money. Well, when they got to Eloy, Arizona, they found that it was stub cotton. It was in the fall. That's the second picking. And there's not a lot of cotton left on the second picking. It was more like 200 pounds for the whole family. And they weren't paid in money, they were paid in script, which meant it was paper money that was only good at the company store. And they were living in a tin shack. Even though it was fall, it was very hot, and they were just making it through the day. After a couple of weeks, a fellow that had befriended my family left his car and took a bus on to California and gave the car to my grandfather. And they loaded up in the old car and they headed out.
They came out here into California, into the valley. Everything was so green, and they were so excited to see green and to see water and to see the rain and to not have the dust storms anymore.
But California farming was different from what they had known at home. By the early 20th century, California farmers led the nation in their reliance upon irrigation, modern equipment, chemicals, hired labor, and scientific experimentation. This expensive agriculture was often undertaken by large corporations. The San Joaquin Valley was a model for this new age, but with thousands of migrants pouring in, there was not enough work to go around.
When he got here, there wasn't as much work as they were told there was, and he had to travel up and down California, stopping at every field, asking if there was work. One of them might, be hired to work for a day or two or for a week.
Highway 99 that goes through the middle of the San Joaquin Valley was actually the artery between our homes.
Eventually ended up in Linnell Camp over here, where we lived in shacks. It was pretty much as described by Steinbeck in Grapes of Wrath.
It is estimated that 350,000 migrants ended up in California during the 1930s. Labor was cheap. Starvation wages made it impossible for destitute families to get ahead. And in 1937, it was reported that 70,000 persons were overtaxing relief and health agencies in the San Joaquin Valley. Families were struggling just to survive.
People say now that Americans won't do certain kinds of jobs. Well, we did them, and so did our folks. And they worked very hard in the fields, picking cotton, picking any kind of fruit, for all little no pay, no health care, no medical care at all, and literally living in tents while they were doing so. And it's only, one generation back, I can remember 5 years old dragging a cotton sack out through the cotton fields here.
The Farm Security Administration began building 12 labor camps in the San Joaquin Valley. Each camp held 2,000 to 3,000 people, cost $1 a week in rent, had hot showers, flush toilets, breakfast for children for 1 cent a day, and a 1-year maximum occupancy rule. But not everyone enjoyed these luxuries.
Sometimes in tents, sometimes they would just lay blankets over the top of the car and pin them to the ground, and they would sleep on the ground.
A canal or a slough or a river or something of the sort, we had a canvas that we would stretch from the car to the nearest tree or bush for shade.
The earliest memories that I have were living in what we called a tent house. And what it was had a wood sides on it all the way around, and then it had a canvas top. And in the summer, hot evenings, you would throw the sides of that canvas top up so that you could get the air in. Our facilities for going to the bathroom were down at the back of the lot in an old wood building that I hated because of the obvious odor, as well as it was scary. There were spiders and bugs and all kinds of things down there.
Living in labor camps, and she remembers having to boil the water before they could drink the water, and how dirty it was. Their mother was very particular about the girls being clean, so they had to heat the water on the stove, and it was very difficult bathing with so many people in the camp because there were nothing but tents and maybe a few metal sheds, but mostly tents that people could pick up, stick in the trunk of their car, and take with them to the next spot.
We were just dirt poor. We had a hot plate where it's electric, and if we wanted hot water, we had to heat water on that hot plate. We didn't shower often, maybe once or twice a week. The restrooms were communal and mostly cold in the wintertime, freezing water. We never had hot water in the camps.
There was no such thing as air conditioning. There was no such thing as even a fan for many, many years.
Most of the cabins were built about 2 or 3 feet off of the ground on blocks, and you could get under the house and dig out a little hole there and lay in it. It was just so peaceful, so quiet, and so cool. After a hot day in the fields, it was very comfortable.
We had a well outside of the house that we brought in later as an automatic well that you actually could turn the deal. But that's where we got our water for cooking, for washing. We had big round tubs we took baths in, and you had to heat the water over the stove.
We always had a bar of lava soap with us. And he said, might as well kill 2 birds with 1 stone. wash your clothes when you're, so we would go swimming and wash our clothes and rinse our clothes.
They ate whatever they harvested. If there were substandard, pieces of vegetables or whatever, they were allowed to take those home with them.
At the age of 12, I was making exactly 1/2 of the family income picking up potatoes. It was the week that we had to wait on the paycheck. During that week, we had no food.
Unfortunately, the malnourished appearance of Dust Bowl migrants became an object of scorn instead of compassion.
The prejudices that I faced growing up, the son of a Dust Bowl Okie. Remember, we were on the ditch bank. It was literally a ditch bank, and we had our canvas out and for shade, and we were swimming, and some young men drove by on the road near where we were camped, and they were yelling something about ditch bank Okies and go back home. And when I see people in need, one of the life lessons learned was not to make fun of them just because they were a little down and out.
And she remembers going to 3 or 4 different schools every year, because as they would pick up and travel and follow the fruit or the vegetables, the girls would have to change schools. She really felt like she was excluded from a lot of the activities because they were a very poor family.
The school bullies, they would always come up to me and they would always start pushing me and calling me the ditch bank Okie and stuff like that, and the fight would be on. I think I attended more than 30 schools growing up.
There were fathers who did not want their daughters to go out with a boy from Farmersville because of where we came from. They'd usually do it anyway, or we would sneak around and do it. But there was that kind of looks that you would receive. And it just kind of cemented in yourself, in your heart, that you're going to be as good or better than they are. And as I went through my career, I was contacted by some of those same fathers later on who apologized for the way that they treated me.
Prejudice and poverty tended to isolate the Okies from society, but social and economic progress is evident among the Dust Bowl migrants over the decades since they arrived in the San Joaquin Valley.
And so you can see the progression from the poor little girls and the very poor family to a family that's pretty affluent.
Wanted an education, wanted to be a lawyer. One of the things that convinced me I wanted to be a lawyer was in Farmersville, there was a labor dispute, and we were on strike. I was a young teenager at that time. In fact, Cesar Chavez came marching through Farmersville, and I have a picture of myself and some other people with him because I met some labor lawyers. Made me want to be a lawyer because this is the prettiest man I ever saw. He had on a beautiful suit, he spoke well, and I just so admired somebody like that.
Bachelor of Science degree in education, and became a school teacher for 20 years, and I was also a police officer for 12 years, and now I'm retired. If you think there's not much of a future, go to school, work hard, and you can find your dream. You just have to work for it, and you have to make it happen.
The migrants' earthy toughness and determination fostered a strong sense of values, which has served Tulare County well.
I mean, literally working the fields, building the roads, building the buildings, and a lot of that will be sustained on into the future. But they also left a legacy of young men and women who went on, did pretty good, worked pretty hard, and are still passing along that value system that we learned during that time.
People this day that lived through those times, they can remember the values that their parents taught them. They had to live through that. And those are values today that I think we need to try to instill in our children.
Life is good, mostly good. You don't have to have a lot to be happy. My life's lessons learned have brought me a lot of knowledge in what can or cannot make one happy.
The truth meant something. You didn't cuss. You especially didn't cuss in front of a woman. It was poor, yeah. People didn't have a lot, yeah. They didn't go to fancy schools. They didn't have fancy things. But there was actually more of a civilized interchange between men and women, and there was a lot less vulgarity. We might have been earthy, but we weren't vulgar.
You face your demons and you actually become stronger.
Displaced Okies coming here to California and making it.